Good morning, good evening, and good day, wherever you are in the world listening to this live webinar from Arria NLG Limited. The title of the presentation today is The Art and Science of Storytelling with Data Explained. The presentation will be done by Dr. Sripada, Chief Scientist at Arria NLG Limited. My name is Matthew Gould. I am the moderator. I am the Chief Strategy Officer for Arria NLG. Just to remind everybody, just a bit of housekeeping to kick off with. As the audience, you can submit questions at any time using the questions tab at the top of the player. If you're not used to using the Bright Talk system, it's right there. Click the tab, enter your question, and we'll deal with it at the end of the presentation. We are leaving ourselves a little time in the 45-minute slot available to us to take your questions. If we don't have time to answer all of your questions, we will get back to you by email or offline. All the links to the presentation can be found in the PDF webinar download on the attachments tab. You'll also find a link to our website, arria.com, and a link to Yaji's Google Scholar page, which is really worth a read, especially his back catalogue of work in artificial intelligence and natural language generation. You can share that and any of the other content at any time by the share this feature at the top of the player. So I'm going to hand over to Yaji. Yaji, Dr. Sripada is a leading natural language generation expert. He's a senior lecturer in computing science at the University of Aberdeen. He's widely published on the subject of natural language generation and that subsection of the artificial intelligence world that it represents. Back in 2009, he co-founded Data to Text at the University of Aberdeen, which has grown up into Arria, the publicly listed company in the UK today. Dr. Sripada, Yaji, over to you.
Thank you, Matt. Hello, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. Today, I'll try to answer these questions. What type of technology helps to tell data stories? Why tell data stories? What are the benefits? And what else is available? I'll begin with 3 thought experiments. We'll see what they are in a while. I'll also answer what's a story. This is just to get a baseline definition for us to refer back during the talk. Then I'll move on to answering why stories work. This is important for us. Why do we care about stories? Then I'll review the technology space. What are the kind of technologies available to help with data storytelling? Are there any gaps? And the main gap is related to linguistic narratives, that is, stories using text. So we will briefly look at linguistic narratives. And then I will introduce natural language generation, a field which helps to automate text generation by computers. And finally, we'll take a look at personal stories, particularly big data is a repository of stories, personal stories. So let's start with the first thought experiment. What happens if Einstein works on big data? So clearly, a great scientist, he'll be very excited with all this data available. And what is guaranteed is the outcome of the experiment will be he will attain a deeper understanding. So please mark my words. He will attain deeper understanding. Let's move on. Do a second experiment. What happens if we have Shakespeare working with big data? Now, clearly, there is an if here. So if he manages to overcome the data handling issues, he's a great literary mind, great storyteller. So we will have lots of great stories. But then, as I said, it's a conditional outcome. But the advantage is all of us gain the benefits. Everyone's understanding of the content improves. Now, maybe you have guessed what my thought experiment 3 would be. What if we manage to wire together the 2 brains? So Einstein and Shakespeare working together in tandem, working on big data. Everyone wins. It's a no-brainer. So it's an ideal scenario for all of us. So the great insights that Einstein can extract are all made accessible to everyone. So what we are interested in this talk is how to improve the accessibility of big data for humans. So that's the human perspective. Why? Why should we actually consider accessibility as an issue at all? Because as humans, we are not wired for handling detail in the data. We are the big picture people. Yeah? So let's look at, so what can we do? If the problem is we can't understand the detail, then is there anything we can do? So there is data science. We already created data science. And this is one of the popular view of data science. So here what you see is math, statistics, subject expertise, and software skills. So you bring all these skills together, and what they do is they actually extract insights. So you can create lots of insights from the data. Now, definitely insights are useful, but can everyone actually have insights at the presentation? So the issue now is about how do you present these insights? So there is another view of data science. This is again gaining popularity by the day. So this is an article you find on Harvard Business Review, which says a data scientist's real role is storytelling. So clearly there is a focus shift here. You're talking from the previous view, which is data and insights. We are now saying data, insights, and people. So there is a clear connection to people. And here you have the data stories, the task of discovering the data stories in the data, and then tailoring them to these audiences. So you have telling a story, a particular audience, and you tailor that. And also there is an action. We will look at some of these things later in detail. So what's a story? A story is a description of change. Something changed. Now, there is another definition here by Chekhov. A story is a problem a writer must solve for a reader. A very nice one. So the implication of this is no problems, no stories. So if we again extend this, we can say big stories are about big problems, not about big data. Now, so let's now move on to why do stories work. So to start with, personally, we all understand our experiences using stories. So imagine you saw an accident on the way to work. The way you start with that, processing that information, or your experience is, you actually do a bit of investigation around and gain a bit more context. And then you create a story in your head. Probably, the roads were icy. This is winter month. The roads were icy. And the accident happened because the car skidded. And if your observations and your context around that confirms that, you actually confirm the story in your head. Now, there are multiple advantages, as we will see, with this kind of story creation in your head. So the next one, which is very interesting, this is a research study. I gave the link there. So what they did was, they make a claim that reading a story is equal to experiencing it. So in other words, if you hear the story, so for example, the accident one I mentioned earlier, after watching the accident, you go to the office and actually tell this story to someone. The person who heard the story gains the same advantage as the one who experienced it in the first place. And that's amazing. So what you have here is, they did some lab studies. So they did brain scans where a storyteller and a story listener both were brain scanned. And if there is a well-told story, so remember there is a condition here. If the story is well-told, then the brain scans are identical. And also there are other studies which show that when brain scans are performed on a person listening to a good story, apparently the whole brain gets activated. It's not just, let's say you hear a story of 7 statements, it's not as though 7 neurons or 7 parts of the brain get activated. It's the whole brain participates into storytelling. So that's a very big advantage. And we can take one conclusion we can make from this is, you have people almost a kind of tuning in. So the person who is listening to the storyteller is connected, is tuned in. And that's very, very significant. So once the tuning in happens, every time the storyteller keeps on adding more information to the story, the listener is already tuned in, and any amount of detail can then be passed on. And that's a very big advantage of storytelling. So let's move on and look at another research study. By the way, all these research studies from psychology, no wonder, because they are the people who are studying mind, human mind. So this is another study where the claim is a story is a low-cost mental simulation. So what that says is, if you want to learn something complex, you don't have to actually go and experience that complex thing. You can just hear a story, which again relates to what we saw earlier. And also, the stories actually help you to create a kind of simulation. You take a story, you have tomorrow a very complex thing to perform. You can actually create a story of the whole complex scene, enact it, simulate it in your head, as though you are part of that. And then that helps you. It's a kind of an exercise before you actually perform the reality. Like maybe I did a dry run of the talk. So that kind of a simulation before you go and do that real activity. And also there are studies which show that people actually remember stories better. So what you see here is only 5% recollected in a study statistics, whereas 63% remembered a story. The other one is stories move people, and they connect to both head and heart. And therefore, they actually help people to find the energy to act. So it's not enough if I communicate some insights to a person. I need to make sure he or she acts on those insights. Whereas stories seem to actually make this happen. So what we are seeing here is stories have some power over human mind, and that's really powerful for us. If you want to communicate to somebody, tell a story. So in other words, accessibility of information is better when you put it into the form of a story. So just to give you an example, since I used Einstein and Shakespeare, so imagine I want to learn more about general theory of relativity, or I'm coming to it first time. I don't start with Einstein's original paper on general theory of relativity. Probably I will start with a Wikipedia article. Now why? Because it's more accessible. Now if this Wikipedia article is written by Shakespeare, that makes it even better. So that's the message we are saying, that not just any text, it's actually a well-crafted story. And that makes a really big difference, and that gives great power for the speaker to over the listener. And also when I said emotionally connected, apparently a good story, when a good story is told, the audience actually connect to the speaker emotionally, and that is a very important outcome. So what we can say is data science is Einstein plus Shakespeare, which is the view, essentially the storytelling view I presented, the alternative view. So yes, but let's review now what are the technologies available to actually start from raw data and go all the way to the end user. Now, definitely lots of technologies, particularly on the data end. So you have a number of technologies for data management, data analytics, and so on. But when it comes to presenting data to people, you have mostly visual. So, and you can actually tell a story using visuals. So visual narratives are everywhere. So lots of people try creating visuals, and through those visuals tell stories. Definitely this works, and in a lot of cases it works perfectly probably. But there is also another issue. There is a possibility of actually telling stories using language. Now this technology exists mostly in the lab, and in the past few years is being commercially used. And what we are going to focus, because you would probably have lots of talks on the web and lots of information around the other technologies, but very little information on linguistic narratives and the technology that automates the production of linguistic narratives. So this talk from now on will focus mainly on linguistic narratives. So what are they? We have a long history. In fact, a lot of stories originally started with oral stories. In fact, we have bedtime stories. We all grew up listening to these, and maybe some of us actually tell these bedtime stories. So we have a culture. The humans have evolved telling and listening to stories, oral stories particularly. And also, certain ideas are best communicated using text. So I have a message on the screen which is currently written in text. So think of creating a visualization that communicates the same message with the same power. A small number of words manage to communicate that information. So there are certain things words can do. And by not using that, we are in some sense turning off a channel. So there are probably different channels to human mind, and we are only using one of those channels and just ignoring a huge bandwidth available. And also, if you think of the dashboards where you have too many things happening, a simple dashboard, yes, works. But a very complex dashboard, you have inattentional blindness, various other things, blind spots. So there is a possibility people miss out. So this leads us to the next point, which is visualizations require interpretation. So if you see something, a graph on the screen, you have to interpret it. What is it telling me? You have to know. Let's say I see my ECG. I don't understand this. What's happening? Am I likely to die tomorrow? It's a difficult one because I don't have the medical knowledge required to interpret that graph. So the important requirement for visualization is the person who is looking at the graphs needs to have the expertise to interpret it correctly. Whereas in the case of text, you often find the text actually connects to people more directly. Information is given directly, more directly. And there is absolutely no doubt if you combine text and visualizations in one presentation, you tell a richer story. And that's what you find. The films and the children's story books, everywhere you find text and graphics or other like videos combined together. So that's the most powerful form. But because, as I said, the technology for creating all these other modes exists, I'm going to focus on linguistic narratives. So before we start about linguistic narratives, let's look at a few examples. So this is an example. What you see on the left is data. So this is data of an atmospheric model. It's a simulation model which creates weather prediction data. So because it's a model, you can actually create any amount of data. Gigabytes of data can be outputted. Now, what happens is a meteorologist looks at all this data and writes a weather forecast, which is what an example of what you see on the right-hand side. Now, when I've been working on this for a number of years, initially when I started working with meteorologists, I thought, okay, I take this data, create a summary. But slowly I learned it's not a summary. They're not doing a summary. They're actually telling a story. And this is the reason I call, instead of a weather report, I call it a weather story. So they are trying to actually paint a picture, which is more important for them. And then paint this picture, therefore the person who is actually listening to this weather story can understand what's happening. Now, so let's look at, so what in this particular example, what you find is when I say it's a story, it has a kind of a structure. So for example, you find, to start with, you talk about rain, clouds, and that kind of a weather outlook. And then you talk about temperature, and probably in the end, you talk about winds. Now, but that might change. If there is a cyclonic wind, obviously you have to bring it up to the front. So there are changes, but there is a kind of a structure. And that's what we mean by a story. What story does is, it's more a kind of a form. And please remember, I'm not saying formatting. You could have a bulleted list and still tell a story. You could use a table and still tell a story. So the story is slightly deeper than formatting. So I'm talking of a form, which is more at the semantic level, not at the formatting level. And by the way, so this one, we actually have a deployed system where, generally, if you use manual workforce, you probably can produce something like 60 reports, whereas our system can do 5,000 reports in less than 1 minute. So of course, as you can imagine, you get that mechanical advantage by automating the process. The next one is a portfolio story. Imagine I have a portfolio, a number of securities I buy, I invest into them. And what you see on the left is a summary of that portfolio, something a description about what's the kind of change. Remember, as I said, my story, definition of a story is about change. And there are few changes happening. So to start with, the market is changing. I hold a portfolio of securities, and the market is not static, it's changing. So with respect to that change, what's happening to my portfolio? That's my portfolio story. And on the right, what you see is a graph of the data. And you also see, interestingly, a textual annotation on the graph itself, which is more contextualized. If you are clicking on a particular part of the graph, you actually get a shorter description about that part. So this is the case I was mentioning earlier, where text and graphs coming together and making it even more powerful. So you tell a much better story using graphs and text together. Now let's move on to how do you automate, what is the technology you need for automating the production of narratives. But before we jump ahead, let's take a quick recap of what we did. So I started off with the experiments, where I essentially showed the importance of actually having Shakespeare on board with Einstein to actually get the benefits of big data. So you need both minds. So we will move on and look at this aspect more in detail now. But basically, you need two great minds to get this whole thing working. And we also then looked at why stories work. And we saw psychology and the experiments in psychology shed a lot of light on this. And we have lots of evidence showing now that in some sense, stories actually give you power. So if you think big data gives you power, stories actually gives you power in a different way, actually gives power on the people. So you can almost have control over people. And then we saw that, yes, there are lots of technologies, and visualization is one of the most dominant ways of actually presenting information to people. It works great, and we saw a few examples where maybe linguistic narratives also can help. And I showed you a couple of examples where you saw the text and graph coming together. In fact, even in the weather case, there are maps and other graphs that go with the report, or a table of icons goes with the report. So you have a kind of a multimodal presentation helping the people understand what's happening. But some of these things could be at a very surface level, like the color choices. But we are interested in the form. And we said narratives have that kind of a form which somehow captures the content and presents it to users or end users. And they often find information presented in that form very, very quickly understandable. So the comprehension improves by having any information presented into a narrative structure. So let's look at, now let's understand the technology. But before we understand, we have to understand a few more things. So this whole linguistic narratives thing, we can understand that at the science level, methodology level, and technology level. So I'll go over each one of them now. So the science. Now this is, to me, a very important thing, where you are actually going to solve the problem of bringing these two minds together. So I mentioned earlier that you require two minds. The sense maker creates the potential content for the story, and the storyteller who actually builds and tells the story. Now let's spend some time looking at these two minds. Now the sense maker is, if you see, the first view of data analytics or data science we had. So this is a typical science mind. So you look at a lot of data, extract the objective truth. So the focus is more on the truth, or what I can say is the focus is on improving the signal to noise ratio. More content you can extract, the better you are. So the focus is all on that. Now let's look at the storyteller. The storyteller is more focused on the hearer, somehow having that power to control. And also the storyteller is interested in the form, as I said, the overall form of the presentation. Now this is more about beauty. So one mind is focused on the truth, and the other mind is focused on the beauty. So you have actually, if you follow this, the whole idea of thinking data science is a storytelling enterprise, you are talking of actually bringing beauty and truth together. And again, let's take another step on the same thinking. And if we see that, as I said, science is focused on truth. But some of us would say, if somebody builds a very great model out of data, which again, a lot of us spend a lot of time, and we also realize that data science is all about building models. We always work in terms of find models that fit the data. So there's a space of models, and you're constantly searching in that space of models. So the sense maker's job is to actually find models. Now, maybe at some point we manage to find one model, and that's actually, according to the science side, it's the one model that represents the objective truth from the data. Now, very often you find people saying, oh wow, that's a beautiful model. So in other words, you are saying it's the truth and also beauty. So what that means is truth is beauty and beauty is true. And let's move on to the other side. Once again, if you go, and as I said, the storyteller mind is more the arts side. So our social sciences, our behavioral sciences. Now, again on that side, if you look at the visualizations or a good story, we say it's a beautiful story or a beautiful visualization. In fact, there are so many. If you type into Google beautiful visualizations, you find them, and really they are all beautiful. So what you have is, but then they're all trying to tell the truth. Remember, in fact, the whole idea of signal to noise ratio or improving it comes from communication concepts or signals and communication theory. So what you have there is the storyteller or the information visualization people or the linguistic narratives people are focused on actually improving signal to noise ratio as well. So they are interested in truth as well. So you have this kind of a combination of beauty and truth, and in fact beauty is equal to truth, as I said. So there is a great deal of thinking that we can actually do at this level, and that's really, really exciting, that you have now a possibility of actually bringing together science and arts into one mind. And this is that original experiment I showed, the third experiment I showed you, where you wire Einstein and Shakespeare. So you have, so that's one thing. And the other important thing, so okay, yes, I get it, two minds, but then how do these two minds work together? Because that's a very important problem to solve as well. Now, and the interesting thing is, each of these minds are actually working with the end user or the listener or whatever you call it, the end user. So the sense maker is always trying to solve the problem that the end user has, and the storyteller is making sure the solution and the problem is communicated perfectly. So both of them actually are focused on the end user, and therefore that gives them the common purpose. And therefore the sense maker and storyteller work in tandem. They are working in one direction with one goal, and that's what makes the whole thing work. So that's the science part, and there is a lot of work in psychology and cognitive science around this. Sorry, let me go back. I have another concept. So what we want is, if we are developing science around actually understanding this mind of a dual mind combination, then we have to go to psychologists and learn how they study human mind. And normally they start with behavioral data, because all sciences require some data to start with, and they have behavioral data. So what this means in our context is, if we have a set of examples where humans have actually done a good job, they told a good story with data, and then we can actually study those examples and then learn a lot. Now this happens in visualization. If you go to visualization community and look at some of the people who made major contributions, such as Edward Tufte, his books on visualization, you go and look at those books and see what they do. They actually look at a number of classic information visualizations, and from them he learns a lot of things. Like, for example, he picks up a concept called data to ink ratio. So he says your data in the graph should be maximized rather than the ink you put on the screen. So for example, the grid lines, he says, are pretty useless. Now again, as I said, this is an information visualization person focusing on data to ink ratio, which is almost like a signal to noise ratio. So once again, we are seeing, so we can do something similar, and that's the concept we have here of what I call data to text corpus. So what happens in this? So let's look at data to text corpus. So I show a very simple example here. What you see on the right hand side is a small table with hours in the day and wind direction. I again deliberately kept it southerly wind, and the wind speed increasing steadily. So given that you have a sentence describes that, yes, it's a story. It's telling you a story of how the wind changes during the day. And I said the story is a change. So description of a change. So you have southerly wind 0206 increasing 1620 by evening. Now, given these two things, you have the data and you have the corresponding text. And a collection of this, you have hundreds, let's say, or millions. You have lots of these things, and you spend time analyzing. And if any of you have experience with natural language processing, lots of people do this corpus analysis. In fact, computational linguistics and natural language processing, text analytics are dominated by corpus-based approaches. So this is nothing new. And in fact, you can also see this, the data and the text thing as more like a kind of a machine translation, which again is very corpus-driven. So you have, the data could be seen as English and, French or something, and the output is the other language. So data is another language. So it's a kind of a machine translation problem here. You're translating from data into text, and you can actually learn. So we do a lot of this kind of corpus studies, and there are some researchers who spend time actually doing this automatically. In other words, they are trying to learn a translation model completely, which is fine. But my interest and our group's interest mainly is to actually look at them manually and try to extract knowledge out of it. Knowledge that has the ability to actually guide the system design. That's the important thing. We are interested in eventually designing a system, and what we require is the knowledge for that design. And so what are the kind of knowledge? So your corpus is a knowledge source, and what are the kind of things? The most important for us obviously is the story form, as I said, and of course also the story content, because the story form is what gives we will have a look at that. And also, because this is a normal corpus analysis, you can also learn a lot about the language. So for example, weather reports. So first thing you notice when you read a weather report is the sub-language. There is a sub-language there, weather is, as it is called, which has a very peculiar kind of syntax, and probably somebody with a lot of strict grammatical notions might even find that some sentences are not even strictly grammatical. But then that's the register, that's the genre of that text. So you have a lot of linguistics-oriented knowledge you can extract from that. And the other important thing is you can also actually connect that language back to data, what we call grounding. So you can actually, so for example, although in this case that's not possible, but let's say you have a huge collection of color terms used in the text, and we all know colors are a combination of red, green, and blue. You can actually learn the rules of what does pink mean. Does it mean 128 of red and some kind of number combination? And that's really, really very interesting as well. So that kind of grounding, the language grounded into data. I'll just quickly go back to the previous slide to just talk about another aspect, which is again very important. The sense maker and the storyteller. The sense maker, as I said at some point, that the sense maker is focused on building a model space and searching in the model space and find models that actually represent the objective truth in the data. Now, we saw that it's possible to come up with one model sometimes, but a lot of times if you had worked with the data and tried to fit models, you never succeed in actually fitting the ideal model. You might have a range of models. So what the storyteller then says is, okay, so these are the sense maker tells the storyteller, these are the models I have built. And then the storyteller says, okay, out of all those things, actually, this model fits my purpose. So in other words, what the storyteller and sense maker do is together, they find a sweet spot, a model that when communicated to the end user actually does the magic. Now that's the content. So in other words, the storyteller is helping the content selection as well, and that is why, I mean, I had to go back here, that's what the knowledge, what kind of knowledge helps to actually do this kind of selection. The story form has the ability to even do the selection, help with the selection process also. So let's move on and introduce the concept of natural language generation. This is a field which is about automating natural language text production. And the inputs usually are non-linguistic. They have to be non-linguistic. And given a non-linguistic input, the system is capable of producing text in a target language. And there are people who work on different languages in the same system or different systems. And the important thing is, this is quite a complex task. So it's not a simple translation in one step. Actually, a lot of systems do this over a number of stages. And broadly, we can divide that system into two parts. The first part is strategic energy. What this does is, it's all about design. The focus is on design of the narrative. Whereas the second part, tactical, is more about rendering that design to text. Now, this actually matches very well with visualization community as well, because in visualization you again have these two stages. You design a visualization and then you use graphics to rendering. Now, exactly like in the case of visualization, you often find people spending a lot of time on the design and then just use a graphics package. You can do a similar thing. In fact, there are a lot of off-the-shelf packages available to do the tactical NLG. But the strategic NLG, which is more semantic and also more, the content and the form, that part is the difficult one. So from the storytelling side, that's the one we want to look at. So the strategic NLG part is the one that actually builds the stories we require. Now, we have been saying that a story is a way of organizing information, beginning, middle, and end. There is one very high-level structure, but there are different structures. And also, there is another very important part of a story. A story has a chain of events, or messages, or assertions, whatever you call. So typically, these are cause-effect chains, but these chains actually make the whole story work. In fact, if some chain, a few links are removed, and still the overall story hangs together because of that structure you have, and also because the causal chains actually can connect to slightly longer distance over longer distance as well. So this is why stories work, that we somehow, when you hear about a story, you actually are able to make inferences in your head, and if there are any gaps, you can even fill it. And this is probably what happens when I said earlier, when a good story is heard, people's whole brain is activated, because what's happening is, you hear a story and it's a well-told story, suddenly you have a lot of information and experiences you have get connected. Because it's a good story, you try to connect various things and the whole thing hangs together. And that's the advantage. So the methodology, very simple, 2 stages. You acquire the knowledge, build the system, and if the story is already good, you're lucky, you can stop there. But normally, if the story is not good enough, you go back, acquire more knowledge, and keep on repeating this. And this is again exactly how data science works. You build a model, you do all your analysis, you false positives, false negatives, all that, and based on this matrix, you go back and say, okay, so I need to improve, refine my model. So exactly the same methodology, nothing changing. So the technology, so what you see here is a standard pipeline. So on the first part is the analysis and interpretation, where you have the sense maker modules. So that's the typical conventional data science pipeline. And then there are messages, which are the kind of concepts that you have. I'll come back to this one. So the second part is the natural language generation in this case, but this engine can also do the graphs. The example I showed you earlier, it can do visualizations, simple visualizations, and text. And the two actually communicate using a language which is messages. Now, this is a very important concept. So I mentioned earlier the reason or the connection between the two minds is based on the audience. And once again here, the same thing happens. When the sense maker writes the messages, she writes in the language that the user understands, or what we call every communication theory says that there is a common ground. There is some mutual knowledge. If I am able to communicate to you, it's because we share a conceptual space. If that space is not shared, we cannot communicate. There's no communication possibility. So what we are saying here is you have that same conceptual space is what is used by the sense maker to write and that's what we call the articulate analytics. Analytics creating models and expressing them in the same language that's shared between the storyteller and the listener. And that's very important. So this is again another report, cricket match report. So what you have is after a game, you have a report actually telling you a story of what happened in the match. These are lots of stories are told, and a lot of times professional, let's say a very big match happens, and the story could be of any game, any sport. So you have a big professional match happening, then obviously there are a lot of reporters who can report about the game. But imagine a backyard cricket game. Maybe my son is playing in a game. It's not covered, it's not reported in the press. But imagine if an NLG system could actually produce these things. These personal stories have great value. In fact, that's what I'm now leading on to the next slide is about. That big data is a big repository of personal stories, lots of personal stories. So if you think of my supermarket storing all my data, they have a lot of data about me, what things I buy, in what order or what groups. So they know a lot about me. So if they come back to me and say, okay, we know a lot about you, what do you want to hear? Now, obviously, I'll be very interested in hearing about lots of things. For example, I could ask them if I've been eating a lot of sugary food of late, because that might matter to me. So things like that. So a lot of content in the big data is actually connected to our personal life. And it's really, really important we tell those stories. And when I say personal stories, it's not necessary. It should be really a person. It could be any entity. It could be a thing. It could be a place. Like, for example, the weather story is about a location. And the other benefit, which is again, this is a benefit storytelling gives back to the sense maker. Because you could ask, why should I care about storytelling? All I care about is some insights to be extracted from data. I'm a modeler. I can live with that. But there is an advantage. The advantage is when you have a story, particularly a personal story being told, there is a great focus on that particular one person and all the context and everything around that, helping you to actually refine your model even further. In other words, you have a very deep understanding of a particular point of view or perspective of the data. Now, just extend this idea now and go around having personal stories told in all perspectives, 360 degrees view of the data. Then what might happen is a known unknown for one person might actually turn out to be an unknown for another person. And that's a very big advantage. So just to conclude, you have stories connecting individuals and communities to big data. And this is what we started off with. The connection from data to people is what we want to make. And natural language generation technology seems to be mature enough to tell these stories, because all the examples I showed in the talk are all things that are generated by the pipeline I showed on the talk. And personal stories are the most powerful. So that's where I stop and hand you back to the organizers for question answering. Thank you. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Yaji. Great presentation. We might have time for this one question. We have 3 questions. I'm going to try and get to them. If you don't have your question answered, we will get back to you one-on-one. First one is, are there existing methodologies to assess the impact or performance of a story on various audiences? Which are the criteria and indicators that can be measured? Are there any standardized dashboards? Good question.
Sorry, can you repeat the question again? Very quickly.
We'll just take the top part. Are there existing methodologies to assess the impact of a story on various audiences? So the natural language generation generates a story, generates a personal story. Is there any sort of sentiment or otherwise analysis where we can gain a view of its impact? Is it working to communicate the effect that it should be?
Yes, yeah. So obviously, I mean, a very costly procedure is to do the brain scans in one thing. But very often what we do, in fact, in our own research, we actually did lots of studies where people were given the textual summary and then we measured their task performance. That's probably the best one. So, for example, doctors in the medical case, they read a summary. In fact, we did some studies with doctors where they found that if it's a well-told story, the decision making is actually better. So yes. So it's all based on, have you made a better decision with the story? And that's a very accepted way of evaluating. It's a good question. Yes. Yeah.
And we've got 1 minute left. So maybe just describe, Yaji, very quickly, the idea of pictures and words, and pictures painting 1,000 words. Could you pull that out a bit? Just the importance and criticality of language for humans over pictures.
Yeah, I mean, I did mention this in the talk. See, with a picture, what happens is you have somebody there's a picture and there's an interpreter. Whereas with the text, what happens is you need to actually have text actually do the interpretation for you. So that's the main advantage as I see, that somebody who is actually writing this particular piece of text has done the interpretation and created, particularly if you are doing not just some disjointed bulleted list of text, but actually a well-connected story, then this person has actually done all the interpretation, and the story is the one that's leading you up to the decision. So that's the important benefit you get.
Thank you very much, Yaji. That's great. The webcast will be ending now. Thank you to all of the participants. All of the tabs contain the download. Thanks for those who shared it on tweets. If you would like to get hold of us directly, just go to www.arria.com. That's Arria, ARRIA.com. Thank you, Yaji. Thank you, everybody.